Picture a battlefield in the year 711, where the fate of an entire continent trembled on the edge of a sword. Beneath the Spanish sun, an army unlike anything Europe had ever seen marched forward, warriors with dark complexions, clad in brilliant silks and gleaming armor, speaking a language that echoed across the hills like poetry. These were the Moors, a force that would reshape history, yet whose story remains shrouded in shadow. How did these North African conquerors sweep across medieval Europe, leaving behind towering palaces, dazzling universities, and a cultural legacy that still whispers in the stones of ancient cities? And why, centuries later, do so many of us know so little about them? This is the hidden history that textbooks often glance over. The tale of a civilization that brought light to what some called the Dark Ages. While much of Europe struggled through turmoil, the Moors introduced innovations that would change the world: algebra, astronomy, even the humble toothbrush. Their cities boasted streetlights and libraries when London and Paris were still mired in mud. Yet their story has been pushed to the margins, treated as a footnote rather than the epic it truly is. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of history's most astonishing chapters, one that challenges everything we thought we knew about medieval Europe. What if the past isn't as simple as we've been told? What if the heroes and villains of history aren't who we expect? From the glittering halls of the Alhambra to the bloody fields of Tours, the Moors left a legacy that defies easy labels. They were conquerors and scholars, warriors and poets, both revered and reviled. Their influence seeped into the art, science, and soul of Europe, even as their names were slowly erased. So join me on a journey through time where we'll unravel myths, uncover buried truths, and meet the forgotten architects of the modern world. This isn't just history, it's a reckoning. And by the end, you'll never see the medieval world the same way again. To understand the Moors, we must first journey to the vast, windswept landscapes of North Africa, where their story begins not as a single people, but as a tapestry woven from ancient cultures. The Berbers, indigenous to the region for thousands of years, were the backbone of this emerging identity. These nomadic tribes, known for their fierce independence and mastery of the desert, had long thrived in the shadows of empires from the Phoenicians to the Romans. But everything changed in the 7th century when Arab armies brought Islam across the Mediterranean like a desert storm. The fusion of Berber resilience and Arab Islamic scholarship birthed something entirely new, a dynamic civilization poised to leap across the sea. Trade caravans, not just armies, laid the groundwork for their rise. Picture the bustling markets of Sijil Mossa, where gold from sub-Saharan Africa met spices from the east, and Berber merchants haggled in Arabic under the watchful eyes of scholars. These weren't just exchanges of goods, but of ideas: mathematics from Persia, medicine from Baghdad, and the intricate art of governance from Damascus. The Moors didn't emerge from a vacuum. They were the product of centuries of crossroads conversations, where Amazighan traditions blended with Quranic teachings to create a culture both distinct and cosmopolitan. And then came the spark that would ignite their European saga, the Umayyad Caliphate's hunger for expansion. When the Berber general Tariq ibn Ziyad landed at Gibraltar in 711, a rock that still bears his name, Jabal Tariq, he didn't just bring soldiers. He brought a vision. The Visigothic rulers of Iberia, fractured by infighting, never stood a chance against an army united by faith and fueled by the promise of a new frontier. But here's what often gets overlooked. The Moors weren't mere conquerors. They were translators of knowledge, of architecture, of entire ways of life. The same Berber clans who once roamed the Atlas Mountains would soon walk the marble halls of Cordoba, crafting a Europe that no longer recognized itself. This duality, rooted in Africa yet reaching into Europe, defined them. Arab chroniclers wrote of their prowess in battle, while Jewish poets in Fez praised their tolerance. They were Muslims who prayed toward Mecca, yet their women sometimes ruled as queens, their scientists debated Aristotle, and their artists carved verses from the Quran next to vines inspired by Roman mosaics. To call them simply Arabs erases the Berber heartbeat beneath their achievements. To call them only conquerors ignores the universities they built atop the ruins of war. The Moors were never one thing, they were the alchemy of deserts and libraries, swords and stars, and that very complexity is what made them unforgettable. The strait shimmered like molten silver beneath the crescent moon on that fateful April night in 711, as Tariq ibn Ziyad's fleet of 400 vessels built from the very forests of North Africa sliced through the Mediterranean currents toward an unsuspecting shore. His 7,000 Berber warriors, hands calloused from years of desert skirmishes, now gripped unfamiliar oars with quiet determination. They knew this wasn't merely a raid but history bending beneath their feet. When the hulls scraped against the beach beneath the monolithic rock that would later bear Tariq's name, Gibraltar, from Jabal Tariq, the general made a decision that would echo through the ages. Torches were plunged into tar-coated decks, flames devouring the only path of retreat. As the firelight danced across his soldiers' faces, Tariq's legendary speech thundered, "Behind you is the sea, before you the enemy. You have only the courage in your hearts and the swords in your hands." The Visigothic king Roderick, basking in his palace at Toledo, dismissed early reports of dark ghosts on the southern beaches as pirate raids. But these were no mere raiders. Tariq's forces moved with terrifying precision, exploiting fractures in Visigothic society like water-splitting stone. The oppressed Jewish communities, long persecuted under Roderick's rule, threw open city gates as liberators approached. Byzantine-style heavy cavalry, adapted from Roman tactics, crumbled under the Moors' guerrilla strikes, their armored horses floundering in the rugged terrain the Berbers knew so well. By midsummer, Tariq's scouts spotted the dust clouds of Roderick's approaching army near the Guadalete River, where 80,000 Visigoths planned to crush the invaders in one decisive blow. What followed wasn't just a battle but a masterclass in psychological warfare. Tariq split his forces into 3 crescent formations, a tactic borrowed from the desert tribes, mobile, adaptable, and lethal. The Visigoths, accustomed to rigid frontal assaults, found themselves encircled as Berber archers rained arrows from the ridges while camel-mounted skirmishers harried their flanks. When Roderick's golden armor was spotted floating downstream, his army dissolved into chaos. But the real stroke of genius came after the victory. Instead of slaughtering surrendered nobles, Tariq offered them a choice: conversion, tribute, or exile. This policy of dhimma, a protection for non-Muslims, became the cornerstone of Moorish rule, turning conquered cities into willing allies almost overnight. What's often forgotten is how radically this invasion differed from Europe's earlier barbarian incursions. While Viking longships sought plunder and the Huns left only ashes, the Moors arrived with architects and astronomers in their ranks. Within months of securing Toledo, they were restoring Roman aqueducts, translating Greek manuscripts hidden in monastic libraries, and establishing courts where Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars debated under the same roof. Tariq's burning ships hadn't just been an act of desperation, they were a symbol. Like those flames consuming the past, Al-Andalus would rise from the ashes of the old world, not as a conquered territory but as a beacon. And as the first at hand, the Muslim call to prayer echoed across the Iberian hills at dawn. Even the defeated Visigoths must have sensed the world tilting on its axis. Cordoba in the 10th century was a city that defied imagination, a place where the night wasn't truly dark. While Londoners stumbled through muddy streets by candlelight and Paris counted its few dozen scholars, Cordoba's avenues glowed under the light of thousands of oil lamps, illuminating a metropolis of 500,000 souls. Here, the air hummed with the scratch of pens in 70 libraries, where books outnumbered people in most European towns. The great mosque's arches, red and white like desert sandstone, framed a courtyard where Christians in monastic robes debated geometry with Jewish physicians and Muslim astronomers. This was Al-Andalus at its zenith, not just a kingdom, but a revolution in what a society could be. At the heart of it all stood the Caliph's library, a treasure chest of 400,000 volumes gathered from Baghdad to Byzantium. Imagine parchment scrolls containing lost dialogues of Aristotle, smuggled out of Alexandria's ashes, Persian star charts more accurate than anything in Christendom, and medical texts describing the circulation of blood 7 centuries before William Harvey discovered it. While Charlemagne's scribes struggled to write their own names, Cordoba's paper mills, another Moorish innovation, churned out sheets for students compiling encyclopedias on botany, optics, and even flying machines. The Caliph Al-Hakam Roman II didn't just collect knowledge, he paid translators in gold by the weight of books they rendered into Arabic, creating a beacon that drew thinkers from across the known world. The streets told the same story of synthesis. Walk past the Alcazar's gardens where Persian water wheels fed fountains designed by Byzantine engineers, and you'd hear a cacophony of languages, Arabic verses recited beside Hebrew piyutim, Romance dialects evolving into modern Spanish, and Berber traders haggling in the souk. Moorish architects didn't merely copy Roman techniques, they reinvented them, perfecting the horseshoe arch and latticework screens that filtered sunlight into mathematical patterns. The Hospital of Andalusia, founded by a Jewish vizier under Muslim rule, treated patients with methods from Hippocrates and Galen, alongside pioneering psychiatric care that soothed minds with music and aromatic herbs. What made Al-Andalus extraordinary wasn't just its achievements, but its ethos. In a time when Europe burned heretics and the East suppressed dissent, Cordoba's judges ruled by a simple principle: wisdom is the lost property of the believer, claim it wherever you find it. Jewish philosopher Maimonides wrote his guide for the perplexed in Arabic before fleeing to Egypt. Christian monks smuggled Arabic numerals into Europe disguised as harmless scribbles. Even the calendar reflected this fusion. Islamic lunar months governed worship, while solar cycles dictated agriculture, and merchants dated contracts using both systems. Yet perhaps the most telling contrast lay in the shadows of Cordoba's streets. While Charlemagne enforced baptism at sword point and Viking longships raided monasteries for their gold, Moorish tax records show Christian churches and Jewish synagogues operating freely, their communities flourishing as dhimmis, protected people who paid a tax in lieu of military service. When a visiting German nun, Hroswitha of Gandersheim, called Cordoba the ornament of the world, she wasn't exaggerating. The city's very sewers, engineered with Roman precision but maintained by Moorish civic pride, were cleaner than the banquet halls of Frankish kings. This golden age didn't happen by accident. It was built on a radical idea. That difference wasn't weakness but fuel for greatness. Where others saw borders, the Moors saw bridges between faiths, between continents, between the wisdom of antiquity and the experiments of tomorrow. Their legacy whispers in the quadratic equations schoolchildren solve today, in the guitar strings descended from the oud, even in the orange trees shading Spanish plazas grafts from Damascus that took root in European soil. Al-Andalus proved that enlightenment isn't about who holds power, but what they choose to do with it, and for a few fleeting centuries they chose to light the world. The streets of Toledo buzzed with a sound unheard in most of medieval Europe, the murmur of Hebrew, Arabic, and Latin swirling together in heated debate. In the shadow of the city's towering cathedral, Jewish translators hunched over Greek manuscripts, dictating passages to Muslim scribes while Christian monks cross-referenced texts with Syriac copies. This was the essence of Convivencia, not just coexistence, but a vibrant cultural alchemy where faiths didn't merely tolerate each other, but thrived together. At a time when pogroms and crusades fractured the continent, Moorish Spain became a laboratory of pluralism. The caliphs understood a radical truth: diversity wasn't a threat to power, but its greatest asset. Take the Banu Musa brothers, three 9th-century Muslim scholars who funded a House of Wisdom in Toledo. Their team included a Jewish physician who'd fled persecution in Normandy, a Nestorian Christian fluent in Persian astronomy, and a Berber mathematician versed in Hindu numerals. Together, they didn't just translate Ptolemy's Almagest, they corrected his star charts using observations from Baghdad and Cordoba, creating the most accurate celestial maps of the age. Their patron, the Bishop of Seville, who paid in silver from church coffers, such collaborations weren't exceptions but policy. When the Caliph needed a diplomatic envoy to Christian kingdoms, he often chose Hasdai ibn Shaprat, a Jewish vizier who negotiated in flawless Latin while observing Sabbath laws. The legal framework made this possible. Under the Dhimma system, non-Muslims paid a modest tax called jizya in exchange for autonomy in worship, legal disputes, and even building permits. Synagogues like Santa Maria la Blanca, later converted to a church, boasted intricately carved Moorish arches because Muslim craftsmen worked alongside Jewish patrons. In Zaragoza, Christian nuns studied Arabic poetry under the same roof as imams memorizing the Quran. The Mozarabs, Christians adopting Arab customs, wrote liturgy in Arabic script while keeping crosses around their necks. This cultural cross-pollination birthed masterpieces like the Codex Vigilanus, where a monk in Al-Bulda painstakingly recorded Arabic numerals, including 0 for the first time in Christian Europe despite church warnings about pagan numbers. But Convivencia wasn't utopia. Tensions flared when Berber dynasties like the Almohads rolled back liberties or when Christian kings demanded tribute. Yet even in strife, the system showed resilience. During a 10th-century famine, Cordoba's Jewish quarter distributed bread to all faiths from communal ovens. When anti-Jewish riots erupted in Granada, the Sultan punished the mobs personally, not because he favored Jews, but because disrupting protected communities undermined the social order. The real litmus test came in medicine. At the Hospital of Murcia, Muslim surgeons trained Christian nuns in cataract surgery using lenses ground by Jewish opticians. Patients didn't ask about the healer's faith, only their skill. The legacy lingers in unexpected places. The haunting melismas of Flamenco, they echo synagogue chants filtered through Moorish musical modes. The saffron in Spanish paella, introduced by Arab agronomists working with Jewish spice traders. Even the word algebra carries the imprint of Convivencia. It comes from the title of a book by Persian scholar Al-Khwarizmi, preserved by Jewish translators in Toledo and taught to Christians by Muslim tutors. This wasn't just tolerance, it was a renaissance centuries before Florence, proving that when knowledge flows freely across borders, everyone rises. Yet the most telling artifact isn't a book or building, but a simple chess set unearthed near Seville. The pieces carved from ivory by Muslim artisans depict Christian kings and bishops alongside veiled queens, while the board's inlaid stars mirror a synagogue's zodiac mosaic. A game born in India, refined in Persia, brought to Europe by the Moors and played by people of all faiths. In those 32 pieces, we see the true spirit of Al-Andalus, competition without conquest, difference without division, a world where every move forward was a collective victory. While the Alhambra dazzles visitors with its intricate stucco and reflecting pools, the true genius of Moorish architecture reveals itself in quieter, often overlooked marvels. Just outside Cordoba, the sprawling ruins of Medina Azahara whisper secrets of a 10th-century palace so opulent, its builders supposedly paved floors with mercury to simulate rivers shimmering underfoot. Conceived by Caliph Abd al-Rahman III as a political statement proof that Al-Andalus rivaled Baghdad, this shining city boasted reception halls where envoys from Byzantium and Germany gaped at ceilings inlaid with gold and ivory. Archaeologists still uncover fragments of its geometric mosaics, each tile cut with mathematical precision to form patterns that trick the eye into seeing infinite repetition. But what truly set Medina Azahara apart was its hydraulic system. Aqueducts fed tiered gardens where exotic birds nested among peach trees, while underground channels cooled marble courtyards without a single draft, an ancient form of air conditioning. Seville's Giralda Tower tells another chapter of this architectural revolution. Originally a minaret for the Great Mosque, its ramp system, wide enough for two horsemen to ascend side by side, showcases the Moors' understanding of both grandeur and practicality. Unlike European bell towers with cramped spiral staircases, the Giralda's gently sloping walkways allowed muezzins to ride to the top for the call to prayer, their voices carrying across the city without strain. After the Christian Reconquista, architects preserved the structure, simply replacing the mosque's crescent with a belfry. Today, the tower's honeycomb-patterned brickwork and sebka net-like stone tracery remain textbook examples of Almohad design, proof that even in defeat, Moorish aesthetics proved irresistible. These structures share signature innovations that changed European building forever. The horseshoe arch, wider at the base than Roman semicircles, wasn't just decorative, it distributed weight more efficiently, allowing taller ceilings and thinner walls. In Granada's Corral del Carbon, these arches frame a 14th-century coal warehouse-turned-theatre, their curves echoing the sway of palm trees. Arabesque patterns, meanwhile, transformed walls into theological statements. Endless interlocking vines symbolized Allah's infinite creation, while strict avoidance of human figures reflected Islamic aniconism. At Zaragoza's Aljaferia Palace, stucco carvings so precise they resemble lace-disguised structural supports, beauty and function intertwined. Perhaps most revolutionary was the Moors' mastery of light. In Malaga's Alcazaba, lattices cast shifting star patterns that mark the hours like sundials, while the Mosque of Cristo de la Luz in Toledo uses 9 domes, each pierced with unique skylights, to illuminate Quranic inscriptions only at specific prayer times. This interplay of shadow and geometry wasn't mere decoration, it was sacred mathematics in stone. Even after centuries, these buildings challenge our assumptions. The Alhambra's famed Court of Lions isn't just a pretty courtyard, its 12 marble beasts functioned as a complex water clock, their mouths spouting in sequence to mark the hours. Moorish architects didn't build for posterity, they built conversations between earth and heaven, where every column whispered equations and every fountain sang poetry. High above the rooftops of Toledo, a Moorish astronomer adjusts the brass limbs of an astrolabe, its finely engraved arcs catching the last light of dusk. This deceptively simple device, a handheld model of the cosmos, could calculate prayer times, predict harvests, and even guide travelers across trackless deserts. While Europe still debated whether the Earth was flat, Al-Andalus scholars were mapping the heavens with precision that would make Copernicus gasp centuries later. The astrolabe's invention wasn't Moorish, but their refinements transformed it into medieval Europe's most sophisticated computer. In Cordoba's observatories, tables compiled by Al-Zarqali charted planetary motions so accurately they remained in use for 500 years. Even Columbus carried them across the Atlantic. These weren't just tools, they were bridges between earth and sky, built by minds who saw no divide between faith and reason. Step into the marble-cooled halls of a Moorish hospital, and you'd witness medical practices centuries ahead of their time. Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine, a 5-volume masterpiece penned in Persian but disseminated across Europe via Arabic translations, became the definitive medical textbook for 600 years. His descriptions of contagious diseases, paired with Al-Zarawi's illustrated surgical tools including bone saws and catgut sutures still used today, formed a healthcare system where hygiene wasn't superstition but science. In Lucina's Jewish quarter, pharmacists distilled rosewater for antiseptics while compiling formularies that mixed Arab herbal knowledge with Greek humoral theory. Patients suffering melancholia weren't exorcised, they were prescribed music therapy in garden courtyards. a holistic approach that modern psychiatry is only now rediscovering. The true test of Moorish genius, however, lies not in grand libraries but in the humble waterways snaking through Spanish farmland. The acequia's gravity-fed irrigation channels adapted from Roman aqueducts but perfected by Berber hydrologists turned arid plateaus into orchards bursting with citrus and almonds. Farmers in Valencia still use the Tribunal de los Aguas, a Moorish-era water court that meets every Thursday at the cathedral door to resolve disputes with the same efficiency as 1,000 years ago. These weren't mere ditches but hydrological symphonies. Sedimentation tanks filtered silt, while carefully sloped channels prevented erosion. The introduced crops, spinach from Persia, rice from China, sugarcane from India, rewrote European diets. Even the iconic Spanish orange owes its existence to grafting techniques perfected in Andalusi nurseries, where agronomists crossbred varieties like alchemists crafting gold. What tied these innovations together was a worldview that saw no contradiction between observing Allah's creation and harnessing its patterns. Astronomers like Ibn Firnas, who reportedly built a glider centuries before Da Vinci, studied bird wings not as heresy but as divine inspiration. Medical texts included anatomical drawings despite Islamic taboos because healing souls required understanding bodies. And when Christian kings eventually reclaimed these lands, they didn't destroy the infrastructure, they quietly adopted it. The real measure of the Moors' scientific legacy isn't in dusty manuscripts, but in the fact that Europe's Renaissance began not with original discoveries but by translating their works. From the quadrants guiding Portuguese navigators to the herbal remedies in monastery gardens, the Islamic Iberian Peninsula had become the silent engine of progress, one irrigation channel, star chart, and scalp suture at a time. Walk through any Spanish marketplace today, and you'll unknowingly step into a linguistic time capsule. Every shout of "Allez" from the flamenco stage, every scribble of "Azúcar" on a grocery list, even the lazy afternoon siesta, all whisper a secret. Arabic never truly left the Iberian Peninsula. When the Moors arrived, they didn't just bring armies and architects, they brought a language that would weave itself into the very fabric of Spanish, leaving behind over 4,000 words like hidden treasures in plain sight. Start with the basics: arroz for rice, aceituna for olive, naranja for orange, all derived from Arabic terms like arroz, az-zaytun, and naranj. These weren't just borrowed words, they were stamps of cultural impact, proof that when a civilization introduces new concepts, the language adapts to hold them. But the real magic lies in the words that traveled beyond Spain's borders. Follow the trail of alcohol from the Arabic al-Kul, originally referring to finely ground antimony used as eyeliner, later distilled by alchemists into the intoxicating liquid we know today. Or mattress from matra, the woven mats Moors slept on, so comfortable that crusaders carried the idea home. Even coffee owes its global name to the Arabic kahwa, while sugar traces back to sakar, sweet reminders of the Moorish trade networks that connected continents. These terms didn't just migrate, they transformed, carrying with them entire chapters of history in their syllables. The Mozarabs, Christians living under Moorish rule, became linguistic alchemists, blending Latin roots with Arabic structures to create a hybrid tongue. Their documents, like the 11th century Khaja's short poems scribbled in Hebrew or Latin manuscripts, reveal startling intimacy, love verses where romance lyrics suddenly burst into Arabic refrains as naturally as breathing. This wasn't code switching, it was the birth of a new way of thinking. When Mozarab said albondiga, meatball, from al-bundak, or aldea, village, from aldea, they weren't just borrowing, they were building a bridge between worlds. English, too, holds unexpected Moorish fingerprints. The stars zenith and nadir come directly from Arabic astronomical terms, while admiral descends from Amir al-Bahr, commander of the sea. Every time a scientist writes an algorithm, They honor 9th century mathematician Al-Khwarizmi, whose name Latin scribes garbled into algorithmi. Even mundane words like checkmate from shamat, the king is dead, or tarif from tarifa, carry echoes of chess games played in Cordoba's courtyards and customs duties levied in Almeria's ports. What's most striking isn't just the quantity of these borrowings, but their resilience. After the Catholic reconquest, Spanish authorities tried purging Arabic influences, yet the language clung like ivy on a castle wall. Farmers kept calling their water wheels Noria from Nayura. Architects still designed azoteas, flat roofs from Azuteja, and musicians strummed the lute from Al-Ud. Language, it turns out, refuses to be conquered. Today, when a Spanish speaker says "haster" until, they're unconsciously echoing the Arabic hatta, a preposition surviving 8 centuries of political upheaval. These words aren't artifacts, they're living proof that culture endures long after empires fall, carried forward on the breath of every conversation. Beneath the latticed arches of her Cordoban palace, Walada bint al-Mustakfi held court like no other woman of her age, her verses slicing through societal expectations as deftly as the gold embroidery on her sleeves. Daughter of a caliph, this 11th century princess didn't just inherit wealth. She wielded a pen sharper than any sword, openly mocking male suitors in poems that became the talk of Al-Andalus. "I am fit for high places by God's grace," she famously declared, embroidering the words onto her robes in defiance. Walada's literary salon became the epicenter of intellectual life, where male scholars lined up to debate philosophy with a woman who signed her work, "By Allah's will, I walk with pride." Her story demolishes the tired myth of medieval Muslim women as silent shadows in Moorish Spain. They were educators, patrons, and power brokers. The archive of Al-Andalus overflows with such women. Take Lubna of Cordoba, the 10th century librarian who curated the palace's 400,000 manuscripts, fluent in mathematics and poetry alike. Or Aisha al-Hurra, the Granadan noblewoman who negotiated treaties between warring taifas while running one of the era's most prestigious madrasas for girls. These weren't exceptions, they were products of a system that, while patriarchal, offered avenues for female influence unheard of in Christian Europe. Under Maliki Islamic law, women retained property rights after marriage, could initiate divorce, and even served as legal witnesses. The harem fantasy concocted by later Orientalist painters collapses when reading tax records showing Moorish businesswomen owning tanneries, pharmacies, and even shipyards. Education was their passport to power. While Elena of Aquitaine hired male tutors, noblewomen in Seville studied astronomy with the same zeal as embroidery. The physician al-Saud al-Ishbiliya authored medical texts while treating patients of both genders in her clinic. Poet Hafsa bint al-Hajj al-Rukuniya's love verses to her student, later the Almohad Sultan, were so scandalously public that they sparked diplomatic incidents. Even architecture bears their imprint. The intricate stucco work in Granada's Nasrid palaces was designed by Fatima bint al-Omar, a royal architect whose geometric patterns still baffle modern mathematicians. The real surprise lies in working-class communities. Legal documents reveal female silk weavers in Almeria forming guilds, Jewish midwives crossing religious lines to train Muslim apprentices, and Berber women managing irrigation councils in Valencia's huertas. When Christian chroniclers complained about Saracen women who argue theology like bishops, they unwittingly confirmed what Moorish court records show. These women weren't anomalies, but active participants in civilization's flowering. Their legacy lingers in Spanish phrases like "Hombre de bien," man of honor, which originally derived from the Arabic hurra, meaning free woman. Perhaps the most telling artifact is a chess set unearthed near Mercia. The Queen Piece, carved from ivory, stands taller than the king, a silent testament to an era when women like Walada didn't just play the game, they changed its rules. While Europe's queens were confined to tapestries and childbed, Moorish noblewomen built libraries, funded hospitals, and penned lines that still resonate. "I will give my soul to my lover freely, for the noble do not sell what they hold dear." Their voices, preserved on parchment and stone, challenge us to rewrite history, not as a procession of great men, but as a chorus where the female voice rings clear across the centuries. In the mist-shrouded mountains of Asturias, a ragtag band of Visigothic nobles and local shepherds made a stand that would alter Europe's destiny. The year was 722, and the battlefield, a narrow valley near Covadonga, seemed an unlikely stage for history's pivot. Outnumbered 20-1 by the Umayyad forces, Pelagius and his 300 rebels turned the terrain itself into their ally. As Muslim chroniclers later recounted with grudging respect, boulders rained down from the cliffs onto the advancing columns, while sudden storms swelled the Deva River into a deadly trap. What began as a skirmish became legend, the first Christian victory in what would stretch into an 8th-century struggle, the Reconquista. Yet this wasn't merely a war of crosses against crescents. The real story lies in the shifting borders, both on maps and in minds. For the next 200 years, the embers of resistance flickered in the north's rugged folds. The kingdom of Asturias, no larger than modern-day Montenegro, expanded inch by inch through a tactic the Moors never anticipated: cultural mimicry. Asturian kings like Alfonso II rebuilt their capital, Oviedo, with horseshoe arches and intricate stucco work, Moorish aesthetics serving as both trophy and template. Meanwhile, in the Pyrenees, the Basque kingdom of Pamplona forged alliances through marriage rather than battle, its queen Wonka wedding the Umayyad governor's son in a chess move of dynastic diplomacy. The frontier wasn't a line but a living membrane where Berber garrisons traded silver for Asturian cider and bilingual scribes drafted treaties in Arabic and Latin. The turning point came from an unlikely source, a desert. In the 11th century, the caliphate's collapse fractured Al-Andalus into squabbling taifas, each vying for dominance. Christian kings exploited this like master tacticians. Fernando I of Leon didn't just demand tribute from Zaragoza and Toledo. He insisted they pay in gold dinars minted with crosses, a psychological dagger twisting in plain sight. Then came the thunderclap of 1085, Alfonso VI of Leon Castile storming Toledo, not as a destroyer but a curator. Rather than burning its legendary libraries, he employed Muslim architects to design his new churches and appointed Jewish translators to render Arabic texts for his courts. The Reconquista's genius lay in this duality: sword in one hand, scribe's quill in the other. Maps tell the silent drama. At its peak in the 10th century, Al-Andalus spanned 4/5 of the peninsula. By 1200, it had shrunk to a third. But these lines conceal more than they reveal. The real shifts happened in marketplace haggles, where Leonese merchants adopted Arabic credit systems, and in royal bedrooms, where Aragonese princes wed Muslim princesses to cement alliances. When El Cid, the mercenary immortalized in epic poems, switched sides 3 times between Christian and Moorish patrons, he embodied the era's fluid loyalties. Even faith proved negotiable. Mozarabic Christians keeping Arabic prayer books, Mudajars maintaining mosques under Christian rule, and Jewish diplomats like Samuel ibn Nagrilla rising to vizier in Granada while composing Hebrew verse. The fall of Cordoba in 1236 marked not an end but a metamorphosis. As Ferdinand III marched into the Great Mosque, now consecrated as a cathedral, workers were already scrubbing Arabic inscriptions from the walls. Yet the patterns etched in the stone refused to disappear, just as the echoes of Adhan lingered in the vaulted ceilings. What the Reconquista achieved was neither purity nor purge, but a palimpsest layer upon layer of coexistence, scraped away and rewritten, yet always with traces of what came before. The legend of El Cid paints him in broad strokes: a Christian knight battling Moors for God and glory, his sword Tizona flashing like divine justice. But the truth is far more intriguing. buried beneath layers of medieval propaganda and nationalist myth-making. Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar wasn't just a warrior torn between two worlds. He was a master strategist who understood the realpolitik of Al-Andalus better than any of his contemporaries. Born in 10th century Castile, he grew up speaking Arabic as fluently as Latin, his childhood steeped in the same hybrid culture that produced Mozarabic hymns and bilingual treaties. When King Alfonso VI exiled him over a petty dispute, El Cid didn't ride off to fight for Christendom. He offered his services to the Muslim ruler of Zaragoza, Al-Mu'tamin. For nearly a decade, El Cid fought alongside Berber armies against both Christian and Moorish foes, his tactics honed in the fluid allegiances of Taifa politics. Muslim chroniclers praised him as Al-Kankari, the challenger, while Christian poets scrubbed these years from their epics. His greatest victory came not against Muslims, but at the gates of Valencia in 1094, where he defended the city's Moorish populace from Almoravid invaders, then ruled it as a sovereign prince under Islamic law. Valencia's silk markets and bathhouses thrived under his governance, its mosques untouched even as he attended mass in a repurposed chapel. This wasn't religious hypocrisy. It was the pragmatic calculus of a man who knew that stability meant respecting the tapestry of faiths woven over centuries. The contradictions multiply when examining his inner circle. His trusted lieutenant, Ibn Yahaf, was a Muslim Cadi who negotiated treaties with the Almoravids. His wife, Jimna, likely had mixed Christian-Muslim ancestry common among noble families along the frontier. Even his iconic sword, later mythologized as a crusader's weapon, was forged in Cordoba's workshops, its blade etched with Quranic inscriptions praising Allah's mercy. The real El Cid emerges not as a paragon of medieval chivalry, but as a shapeshifter who weaponized cultural ambiguity. When he needed Christian allies, he framed himself as the Campidor, the battlefield champion. When dealing with Muslim vassals, he adopted the title Al-Sayyid, the Lord, minting coins with Arabic calligraphy that invoked divine favor. Modern historians pore over the Carmen Campedoctoris, a rare Latin poem written within decades of his death, which mentions neither religious zeal nor reconquista fervor. Instead, it celebrates his cunning, how he played Christian kings against Moorish emirs, always extracting wealth or land from both. After his death in 1099, his enemies couldn't resist turning him into legend. The Almoravids spread tales of his corpse strapped to a horse, leading one final charge, a story likely invented to explain their failure to retake Valencia. Christian monks later embellished his life with angelic visions, erasing his years of service to Muslim rulers. Even the Canto de Mio Cid, the epic poem that cemented his myth, sanitizes his alliances while preserving glimpses of truth, his grief over desecrated mosques, his respect for learned Moorish judges. El Cid's legacy is a mirror held up to the Reconquista's messy reality. His life proves that medieval Iberia's divides weren't between faiths, but between those who clung to rigid identities and those who thrived in the gaps between them. Today, his tomb in Burgos Cathedral lies beside his wife's, but the Arabic inscriptions on his personal artifacts and the enduring reverence for him in Moroccan oral traditions whisper a different story. He wasn't a hero of Christendom or a traitor to it. He was something far more human, a man who understood that survival in a world of shifting borders required becoming whatever the moment demanded. Snow powdered the Sierra Nevada's peaks on that second day of January 1492, as the last Nasrid king of Granada rode out from the Alhambra's gates for the final time. Mohammed XII, known to history as Boabdil, paused on a rocky outcrop now called El Suspiro del Moro, the Moor's last sigh. Behind him, the palace's honeycombed arches shimmered in winter light, its courtyard silent except for the clank of Castilian armor. Ahead lay exile in the Alpujarras Mountains, where his defeated people would scratch survival from thin soil. But it was his mother Aixa's lacerating words that crystallized the moment. "Weep like a woman for what you couldn't defend as a man." The line, recorded by Christian chroniclers with relish, became the epitaph of Al-Andalus, yet the truth behind Granada's fall is far more complex than a single rebuke. For Boabdil, surrender wasn't cowardice but calculus. By 1491, Granada stood alone, a shrinking island in a Christian sea. The Nasrids had survived through centuries of intrigue, playing Castile against Aragon, even secretly allying with Ferdinand against rival Muslim factions. But when Isabella cut off Granada's grain supply and ringed the city with artillery, including the massive Mendoza bombard capable of shattering gatehouses, the math became brutal. Boabdil's advisors whispered of Constantinople's fate 4 decades prior, where Ottoman cannons reduced Byzantine walls to rubble. The treaty he signed promised religious freedom for Granada's Muslims, a pledge broken within years. But at that moment, it spared 50,000 civilians the horror of a sacking. The handover ceremony itself was a masterpiece of political theater. Ferdinand and Isabella, dressed not in battle gear but courtly silks, waited in Santa Fe's war camp as Boabdil approached with the Alhambra's silver keys. Chroniclers noted how the Catholic monarchs pointedly avoided humiliating him further, allowing the deposed king to kneel and kiss their hands before riding away with dignity and tact. This carefully staged magnanimity couldn't mask the seismic shift. Isabella immediately ordered the palace's central mosque consecrated as a church, even as workers scrambled to whitewash Arabic inscriptions from the walls. Aix's infamous remark, often stripped of context, reveals the fractures within Nasrid leadership. As Boabdil's political rival, she'd helped him overthrow his own father years earlier. Her scorn reflected bitter palace divisions that weakened Granada's final defense. Yet even in exile, the family's story defies simple tragedy. Documents show Boabdil negotiated secret land grants in North Africa, where he rebuilt a miniature Alhambra in Fez's hills. His descendants would serve as Ottoman naval commanders, while back in Spain, the Albaycin quarter's Moorish residents continued whispering prayers in Arabic beneath their new masters' noses. The true tragedy of 1492 wasn't just a fallen city, but the broken promises that followed. Within a decade, Cardinal Cisneros would burn Arabic texts in Granada's squares and force mass baptisms, igniting the Alpujarra's revolts. Yet, like the faint traces of gold leaf still visible beneath the Alhambra's whitewash, the Moorish legacy refused to disappear. Those who labeled Boabdil's surrender an ending missed the deeper truth. It was merely a metamorphosis. The same year his keys changed hands, a Genoese sailor named Columbus set sail with Arabic-speaking Jewish translators, carrying nautical charts perfected by Moorish astronomers. The world the Nasrids helped shape was just beginning to unfold. The ink on Granada's surrender treaty had barely dried when the whispers began. Broken promises coiled like serpents beneath the cobblestones. That same year, 1492, while Spain celebrated Columbus's voyage, Cardinal Cisneros marched into Granada's streets with a zealot's fury. His mission, to erase 8 centuries of Moorish culture in a single generation. First came the book burnings, thousands of Arabic manuscripts, medical treatises, poetry, star charts, fed to bonfires in the Plaza Bib Rambla while scholars wept. Then the ultimatum, convert or leave. Many Muslims, now labeled Moriscos, outwardly crossed themselves while hiding Quranic verses in floorboards, their faith clinging like shadows to whitewashed walls. But the Inquisition spies were everywhere, trained to spot the slightest deviation. A child humming an Andalusian lullaby, a woman refusing pork, the telltale ritual ablutions before dawn. The Edict of 1499 tore away even the pretense of tolerance. Moriscos were ordered to surrender all Arabic clothing, burn their genealogies, and abandon public baths, those once great hubs of hygiene now denounced as dens of heresy. In Valencia, authorities staged grotesque spectacles called autos da fe, where entire families were paraded in San Benito's yellow penitential robes painted with devils, before facing the pulley, the rack, or the Iron Maiden. Records from Cuenca's tribunal describe a midwife named Fatima, accused of circumcising newborns, her fingers crushed in a vise until she confessed to crimes she didn't understand. The true horror lay in the bureaucracy, meticulous ledgers logging every confiscated olive grove, every child taken for Christian education, every throat that gasped for water during the Tormento del Agua, forced drowning simulations that left lungs seared with holy water. By 1568, the Alpujarras exploded in revolt. Morisco farmers, pushed to starvation by crippling taxes on silk and sugar, raised banners stitched with Quranic verses. Their leader, Faraxa ben Farax, wasn't some romantic hero but a desperate butcher's son who knew Spain would never let them live as both Spanish and Muslim. The rebellion was crushed with methodical cruelty. Whole villages herded into churches and burned alive. Survivors marched in chains to Galicia's damp forests. But the final solution came in 1609, the Expulsion Edict. Over 300,000 Moriscos, many fourth-generation Christians, were given 3 days to board ships with nothing but the clothes they wore. Eyewitness accounts tell of mothers smothering infants rather than let them starve at sea, of silver coins sewn into hems only to be stolen by Genoa sailors. Yet traces lingered. In Aragon's hills, shepherds kept praying toward Mecca under the guise of blessing the flocks. A cookbook from Toledo contained pork-free monastery recipes identical to Moorish dishes. Most haunting were the crypto-Muslim graffiti found in caves near Granada, Surah verses scratched beside crosses, a duality the Inquisition never could purge. Spain's economy reeled for decades. Abandoned silk looms gathered dust, terraced farms reverted to scrubland, and the very word Morisco became a ghost in the ledger books. The tragedy wasn't just the violence, but the willful amnesia that followed, a nation cutting out its own heart to prove its purity. Centuries later, when historians uncovered the hidden Ajamez windows behind plaster or the Arabic numerals tucked into church accounts, they weren't just finding artifacts. They were hearing echoes of a question Spain still wrestles with. What does it cost to build an identity on forgetting? Beneath the watchful eyes of Inquisition priests, a quiet rebellion took shape in the most unexpected places. The delicate swirls of a tablecloth's embroidery, the aromatic blend of spices in a stew, even the way a woman tilted her head while kneading dough. These were the hidden languages of Spain's crypto-Muslims, communities who clung to Islam in secret after the fall of Granada, leaving traces so subtle they slipped past the notice of all but the initiated. Take the lace makers of Almeria, whose floral patterns mimicked the arabesques of the Alhambra's walls. What appeared to be simple roses to Christian buyers were, upon closer inspection, intricate geometric repetitions of the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith. A single misstep could mean torture or the auto-da-fe, so these artisans wove devotion into the very fabric of daily life, turning domestic objects into silent acts of defiance. Kitchens became sanctuaries of subterfuge. Morisco women developed elaborate culinary codes, refusing to use pork fat even when preparing so-called Christian dishes, sneaking saffron into rice as a nod to golden-hued biryanis once served in Nasrid palaces. Archaeologists in Toledo recently uncovered 16th-century cookware with faint Arabic inscriptions scratched beneath the glazed verses from the Quran disguised as decorative flourishes. Even the act of eating followed secret rhythms. Families would delay meals until after sunset during Ramadan, explaining away their fasts as stomach ailments or pious Christian abstention. The humble mortar and pestle, a fixture in every home, often bore grooves aligned to face Mecca when used, allowing crypto-Muslims to pray without drawing suspicion. The greatest risk and brilliance lay in preserving ritual. In the caves of Guadix, charcoal drawings depict hands raised in Islamic prayer beside Christian crosses, a dual identity etched into stone. Birth records from Cuenca reveal midwives performing the tonic tradition, rubbing a date paste on a newborn's palate, while baptizing the same child in church. Some of the most damning evidence came from the Inquisition's own archives. Confessions extracted under torture describe how Moriscos would clean their homes on Fridays instead of Sundays, or how they'd whisper the basmala in the name of God before meals, disguising it as a sneeze. Perhaps the most poignant legacy survives in music. The melancholy strains of flamenco's Cant Jondo bear an uncanny resemblance to the nasal vocalizations of North African prayer chants. Ethnomusicologists trace the pommas, the intricate handclaps punctuating performances, to the rhythmic tasbih of Sufi dhikr ceremonies. When singers in Seville wail about black moons and bitter exile, they're channeling poetic metaphors that once filled the courtyards of Moorish Granada. The Inquisition burned books, but it couldn't erase the DNA of culture. The way a grandmother's lullaby might include the same microtonal scales as an old Andalusian nuba, or how the phrase "ol" from the Arabic wallah still erupts spontaneously in moments of joy. These weren't just acts of preservation, they were acts of reinvention. A crypto-Muslim apothecary in Valencia might label his jars with Latin herb names while secretly compounding remedies from Ibn Sina's canon. A silk merchant could drape his shop with images of saints, knowing the patterns in the fabric secretly spelled out Quranic verses in Kufic script. Even today, anthropologists find traces in the cantigas of Extremadura, where lyrics about Virgin Mary echo the meter of Arabic Zajal poetry, or in the acequias of Valencia, where water distribution follows the same lunar calendar used by Moorish farmers. The miracle isn't that these practices survived, but that they did so by becoming inseparable from the culture, meant to erase them like ink dissolving in wine, impossible to filter out. While the fall of Granada marked the end of Moorish rule on land, another chapter was unfolding on the waves, one where crescent sails still struck terror into European hearts. The Barbary corsairs, often dismissed as mere pirates, were in fact the spiritual heirs of Al-Andalus's seafaring legacy. Their swift xebecs and galleys patrolled the same waters where Moorish Admiral Tariq ibn Ziyad had crossed centuries earlier, but now with a new purpose. Vengeance turned to commerce, holy war transformed into an economy of capture. These weren't the random raids of lawless brigands, but state-sanctioned operations under the Ottoman-backed Beylerbis of Algiers and Tunis. Many corsair captains, like the notorious Barbarossa brothers, were themselves Morisco's Spanish Muslims exiled during the persecutions, returning with intimate knowledge of coastal vulnerabilities. Their tactics mirrored the guerrilla warfare of their Berber ancestors, striking at dawn when church bells rang for matins, using shallow draft vessels to outmaneuver European warships in rocky coves. A single raid on the Irish village of Baltimore in 1631 netted over 100 captives, while repeated strikes on Iceland's coast left churches smoldering and fishing fleets decimated. What set these campaigns apart was their bureaucratic precision. The corsairs operated a sophisticated ransom network stretching from Marrakech to Marseille. Christian slaves toiling in Algiers' stone quarries could send letters home through Jewish intermediaries in Livorno, their freedom priced in pieces of 8. Captivity narratives like Cervantes' The Bagnios of Algiers, based on his own 5-year imprisonment, reveal a strange duality. Dungeons overflowing with European slaves, yes, but also renegade English gunners and Dutch surgeons who'd converted to Islam for better rations. The corsairs' greatest weapon wasn't their scimitars, but their understanding of human desperation. European powers responded with both fury and hypocrisy. While kings decried white slavery, their own navies continued trafficking African captives to the Americas. The United States Marine Corps anthem still references the shores of Tripoli, a nod to the costly war against the corsairs. Yet few acknowledged how these raids were partly fueled by Europe's own cruelty. For every Moorish galley cutting through Venetian waters, there were memories of mass expulsions from Andalusia, of Inquisition pyres, of generations stripped of their homeland. The corsairs didn't just want gold or converts, they wanted retribution written in the salt spray of the Mediterranean. By the 18th century, this system began collapsing under European naval might, but its cultural echoes lingered. The Maltese language still borrows Arabic sailing terms, Sicilian fishermen chant work songs derived from North African rhythms, and the blue-eyed descendants of corsair captives walk the alleys of Chefchaouen. The sea remembers what the land tries to forget, that history's tides never truly retreat, only reshape the shore. The roads leading south from Granada's Alhambra in the early 1600s were choked with humanity, families clutching bundles of heirlooms, children stumbling over rocky paths, elders whispering prayers in Andalusian Arabic as they glimpsed the Mediterranean for the last time. These were Spain's Moriscos, the last bearers of Al-Andalus's legacy, cast out by royal decree in 1609. But their exile wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of a diaspora that would stretch across continents, weaving Moorish threads into the fabric of empires and resistance movements far from Iberia's shores. For many, the shortest escape route led to North Africa, a bitter homecoming to lands their ancestors had left centuries earlier. Port cities like Tunis and Algiers swelled with refugees, where Andalusian quarters soon echoed with the rhythms of flamenco like strumming on modified ouds and the scent of saffron-infused paella simmering in communal kitchens. Within a generation, these exiles transformed their host cities. In Tetuan, Moroccan sultans employed Morisco masons to rebuild the Medina's whitewashed walls using techniques from Granada, those distinctive geometric tile patterns now known as zellige. In Saleh, near Rabat, entire neighborhoods still bear names like Hay Al-Andalus, where descendants preserve recipes for pastries like emhancha, a coiled almond pastry nearly identical to those once baked in Cordoba's convents. Others fled eastward to the Ottoman Empire, where sultans welcomed them as skilled laborers and cultural elites. Istanbul's Topkapi Palace archives hold petitions from Morisco jewelers requesting permission to open workshops near the Grand Bazaar, their filigree techniques soon influencing Turkish teardrop earrings. In Damascus, exiled physicians from Valencia established hospitals incorporating Ibn Sina's principles, while in Cairo, Quranic manuscripts smuggled out of Spain became treasures in Al-Azhar's library. The most surprising refuge might have been the Ottoman port of Izmir, where Sephardic Jews and Morisco's former neighbors in Spain recreated a microcosm of Iberian multiculturalism, trading zarzuela song lyrics for Arabic maqam scales in the shadow of minarets. Then there were those who crossed the Atlantic not as willing migrants but as hidden passengers. Spanish ships bound for the Americas routinely carried Morisco sailors and servants, some slipping away at port to vanish into the colonies. In Mexico City's archives, trial records from 1620 reveal a startling case. A group labeled Moriscos Secretos caught performing Ramadan prayers in a Veracruz sugar plantation. Further south, Jesuit missionaries in Peru complained of indigenous communities adopting Moorish superstitions, like washing before prayer, likely contact with escaped Morisco laborers. The most intriguing evidence comes from Venezuela's coastal tribes, where 16th-century accounts describe a light-skinned chieftain named Ale teaching guerrilla tactics against conquistadors, using terrain-based strategies eerily similar to those deployed by Granada's mountain rebels. The diaspora's reach extended even to unexpected corners of resistance. When the Pueblo people rose against Spanish rule in 1680, their leader Pepe was said to have advisors who spoke the old tongue of the South, possibly Moriscos who'd found common cause with indigenous allies. In Louisiana's bayous, early French settlers recorded encounters with gens de couleur libre practicing cryptic customs, hanging amulets with Arabic script, avoiding pork, and singing lullabies with lyrics half-remembered from Andalusian ballads. What emerges is not a scattering, but a quiet reconquista of memory, a persistence of identity in recipes whispered across kitchen tables, in architectural flourishes disguised as local styles, in the stubborn survival of a single phrase passed down generations, had her min kalb Al-Andalus. This is from the heart of Al-Andalus. The exiles carried no crowns or banners, only the intangible treasures of a civilization that refused to die. The stage lights of London's Globe Theatre cast long shadows in 1604 as a figure strode forward, a black general in Venetian service, his voice rich with authority, his tragedy already written in the whispers of the crowd. Shakespeare's Othello wasn't just a character, he was Europe's nightmare and fascination made flesh. At a time when England had just expelled its last remaining Moors under Elizabeth's draconian orders, here was a man who commanded armies, wooed noblewomen, and spoke with eloquence that unsettled audiences. The playwright's genius lay in exposing the contradictions of his era. Othello is both revered and reviled, a symbol of Moorish military brilliance and a canvas for deep-seated fears about racial and religious contamination. When Iago hisses about the lusty Moor corrupting fair Desdemona, he's echoing real pamphlets circulating in London, warnings about African heathens infiltrating Christian society through charm and subterfuge. This anxiety wasn't confined to literature. Walk through any aristocratic European garden of the 17th century, and you'd likely stumble upon a blackamoor statue, a black figure rendered in marble or porcelain, often clad in exoticized Eastern garb, holding a tray for candles or fruit. These decorative pieces, now controversial collector's items, reveal a disturbing duality. The Moors were simultaneously aestheticized and diminished, their image frozen in servitude even as their historical counterparts had once ruled empires. A particularly telling example stands in Venice's Palazzo Ducale, a carved ebony figure supporting a clock, its face a grotesque caricature with bulging eyes and exaggerated lips. Created decades after the Battle of Lepanto, when Europe barely repelled Ottoman fleets, such sculptures weren't just decor. They were psychological trophies, reducing a formidable civilization to decorative exotics. The irony cuts deep. While Spanish kings commissioned portraits showing themselves triumphant over turbaned adversaries, their court physicians still prescribed remedies from Arabic medical texts. German princes collected Moorish lacquered armor while their spies fretted about Ottoman alliances with French Protestants. Even the word Moor itself became a slippery insult, applied indiscriminately to Berbers, Sub-Saharan Africans, South Asians, or any non-white figure that triggered Eurocentric unease. Dutch Golden Age paintings like Rembrandt's Two Moors oscillate between meticulous realism and exoticism, capturing individual humanity while framing subjects as foreign curiosities. Artistic depictions often betrayed strategic omissions. Notice how Othello's Islam is conspicuously absent. Shakespeare sanitizes him as a Christian convert to make the character palatable to audiences, erasing the religious identity that had defined actual Moors for centuries. Similarly, blackamoor sculptures never hold swords or books, only trays and torches, scrubbing away their ancestors' legacy as scholars and conquerors. The message was clear: Europe could stomach Moors as tragic heroes or silent servants, but not as equals. What makes this cultural schizophrenia so revealing is its timing. By the 17th century, the real Moorish threat had faded. Granada had fallen. The corsairs were dwindling, yet the spectre grew larger in art and literature. Perhaps conquest breeds guilt, or perhaps imagination outlives reality. Either way, the Moors became a mirror for Europe's deepest insecurities, about racial purity, about its own barbaric past compared to Al-Andalus's golden age, even about the fragility of masculine identity. When Desdemona's father wails, "She is abused, stolen from me, and corrupted by spells," he isn't just grieving a daughter, he's voicing the terror that Moorish influence might seduce rather than subjugate, that its appeal could be cultural rather than martial. The legacy of this fear still lingers. Modern productions of Othello grapple with whether to lean into the play's racial tensions or transcend them. museum curators debate how to display blackamoor artifacts without perpetuating caricatures. And beneath it all runs an unspoken question. Why was Europe so haunted by a people it had supposedly vanquished? The answer may lie in the shadows of Granada's Alhambra, where Arabic inscriptions proclaim, "There is no conqueror but God," a humbling reminder that all empires fade, but their ghosts remain to unsettle the victors. The double helix holds secrets even history books forgot, twisting strands of DNA that whisper tales of conquest, coexistence, and unexpected kinship. Recent genetic studies have ripped apart the myth of a pure Iberian ancestry, revealing that nearly a third of modern Spaniards and Portuguese carry North African markers in their chromosomes. These aren't just statistical blips but living echoes of Al-Andalus, passed down through 800 years of shared history. Take the Y chromosome haplogroup emate1, a genetic signature tracing back to Berber tribes. It appears in 19% of men in Western Andalusia, with concentrations spiking near old Moorish strongholds like Seville and Granada, even more striking. The same markers surface in 27% of Canary Islanders, proving the Atlantic wasn't a barrier but a bridge for these ancient migrations. Population geneticists call it admixture, a clinical term for the intimate mingling of cultures written in adenosine and thymine. When researchers sampled DNA from medieval Muslim burial sites near Toledo, they found close matches not only with modern Moroccans but with contemporary Spaniards living mere miles away. The science confirms what architecture and cuisine have long hinted. Expulsion orders and Inquisition burnings couldn't sever the biological threads woven during centuries of convivencia. Mitochondrial DNA tells an even richer story, passed intact from mother to child. These sequences reveal how Moorish women left an indelible mark. The haplogroup L associated with sub-Saharan Africa appears in 7% of Iberians, highest among those with ancestral ties to Extremadura and Valencia, regions where Nasrid dynasties held sway. But genetics also expose uncomfortable truths. Studies of Spanish nobility's descendants show significantly lower North African ancestry compared to rural populations, evidence that medieval elites guarded their bloodlines while ordinary people intermarried freely. The Basque Country, often romanticized as Europe's purest genetic holdout, actually shares surprising ties with Algerian Berbers through pre-Islamic migrations. Even Portugal's famous Lusitanian identity unravels under genomic scrutiny, with coastal towns showing stronger North African links than inland villages, a silent testament to centuries of trade and intermarriage with Moorish sailors. The most poignant discoveries come from Sephardic Jewish communities. When scientists compared their DNA with Spanish volunteers, they found shared markers tracing back to medieval Iberia, a proof that despite exile and persecution, some Jewish families maintained ties with Muslim neighbors through clandestine trade and mutual aid. These aren't just data points but silent witnesses to a lost world where identities blurred at the edges. Modern efforts to reconstruct Moorish lineage through DNA testing often yield surprises, like the Galician fisherman whose test revealed Berber ancestry, or the Catalonian grandmother whose cheek swab matched genetic profiles from Fez. What emerges isn't a tale of replacement but of resilience, a biological archive proving that cultural exchange went far deeper than politics or religion. The same genes that helped medieval Berbers metabolize desert heat now help their descendants process Mediterranean diets rich in olive oil and almonds. The legacy of Al-Andalus lives on not just in stone and parchment, but in the very cells of those who walk its former streets, unaware they carry chromosomes stamped with the dreams of poets, the courage of warriors, and the quiet endurance of those who refuse to be erased. The haunting wail of a flamenco singer cuts through the night air in Seville's Triana district, a sound so raw it seems to carry 8 centuries of unspoken history. What most audiences don't realize is that every stomp of the dancer's foot, every feverish strum of the guitarist, echoes the forbidden arts of Al-Andalus. Flamenco's DNA reveals its clandestine lineage. The rapid-fire zapatado footwork mirrors the rhythmic stamping of Berber wedding dances, while the dancers' arched back and sinuous arm movements recall the muwashahat poetry performances of Moorish courtyards. Even the word flamenco itself might be a coded reference derived from the Arabic flamengu, meaning expelled peasant, a nod to the Morisco refugees who kept their traditions alive in exile. Listen closely to the Count Jondo flamenco's deepest, most anguished style, and you'll hear microtonal scales that match the makam system of North African music. The singer's melismatic wails, stretching single syllables across cascading notes, are near identical to the adhan, the Islamic call to prayer. Guitarists still use the por arriba tuning, which creates the Phrygian mode's distinctive tension, a sound directly borrowed from the Andalusian oud. These weren't accidental similarities but deliberate survivals. When the Inquisition banned Zambra dances in the 1600s for being too Moorish, Gitano communities in caves near Granada simply rebranded them as flamenco, hiding the old steps within new forms. The palmas, those percussive handclaps punctuating performances, tell another story. Ethnomusicologists trace their complex syncopation to the Sufi hikka ceremonies of Al-Andalus, where worshippers used rhythmic clapping to induce trance states. Even the dancer's costume conceals layers of history. The traditional bata de cola dress, with its long train and embroidered bodice, evolved from the modest yet ornate thobes worn by Nasrid noblewomen, while the shawl's fringes mimic the tasseled belts of Berber bridal attire. Most revealing are the lyrics themselves. The Solar, one of flamenco's oldest forms, often laments La Pérdida de Alhambra, the fall of Granada's Alhambra fortress in 1482. Other verses speak of rivers flowing backward and wine turning to blood, metaphors scholars link to crypto-Muslim laments for lost homeland. The Inquisition's archives contain chilling accounts of Morisco women punished for singing old Moorish songs to their children, songs that likely became the tunas and seguerias of modern flamenco. The dance's very structure betrays its hybrid origins. The 12-beat compas cycle mirrors both the Jewish Sephardic bulerias and the Islamic Nauba rhythm cycles. When performers reach the escabila section, a rapid footwork passage, they're unconsciously replicating the foot-stomping ceremonies of Berber grain harvests. Even the guitarist's rasguido technique, where fingers fan across strings like opening petals, descends from the Moorish tradition of playing the oud with an eagle's feather. This cultural smuggling didn't happen without risk. 19th century flamenco cafes in Cadiz were raided for performing Moorish-style dances, and early recordings by singers like Antonio Chacon showed deliberate toning down of Arabic vocal flourishes to avoid controversy. Yet the essence remained, carried in the DNA of movement and melody. Today, when a dancer's palms twist upward during a viol to quebrada, a move symbolizing supplication, they're unknowingly mirroring the hand positions of Islamic salat prayer. The art form's power comes from this unbroken chain of memory, a testament to what happens when a people refuse to let their culture be erased. Flamenco isn't just entertainment, it's resistance in motion. A living archive written in sweat and heels strikes that still whisper, "We were here." The crumbling walls of the Alhambra found unlikely saviors in the 19th century, not warriors or kings, but ink-stained writers and paint-smeared artists who saw in Moorish ruins a refuge from their own industrializing world. Washington Irving arrived in 1829, a disillusioned American diplomat fleeing scandal, and found himself spellbound by the palaces, echoing courts, and whispering galleries. His Tales of the Alhambra wasn't just a travelogue, it was a fever dream of medieval Spain, where every cracked tile shimmered with the ghostly glamour of lost empire. Irving slept in the abandoned Nasrid palaces, his candlelight flickering against calligraphy that no living soul could read, spinning yarns about star-crossed sultans and enchanted treasures. The book became a sensation, sparking a wave of Alhambrismo, Europe's sudden obsession with all things Moorish, but its true brilliance lay in what it got wrong. By painting the Moors as noble, tragic exotics, Irving sanitized their complex history into romantic wallpaper, a fantasy more palatable to Victorian readers than the messy reality of interfaith wars and intellectual revolutions. Across the Atlantic, artists like Jean-Léon Gérôme and Eugène Delac were conjuring their own visions of the Orient harem scenes and sword-wielding Bedouins dripping with theatrical menace. Their canvases teemed with turbaned warriors and veiled beauties, but look closer and you'll spot the contradictions. Delacroix's Fanatics of Tangier portrays Moors as wild-eyed zealots, while his contemporary Théodore Chassareau depicted them as languid aristocrats lounging in sun-dappled courtyards. This wasn't history, it was cultural ventriloquism, using North African motifs to critique European morals. The irony, many Orientalist painters never set foot in Andalusia. They relied on props like Moroccan rugs and Ottoman daggers staged in Parisian studios, creating a pastiche of Moorishness as authentic as a carnival costume. Yet this romanticization had unintended consequences. Architects like Owen Jones studied the Alhambra's geometric patterns with near-religious fervor, publishing detailed folios that inspired everything from London's Crystal Palace to Victorian tea sets. Suddenly, middle-class homes brimmed with Alhambresque wallpapers and octagonal coffee tables, while composers like Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov infused their symphonies with faux Moorish scales. The craze reached absurd heights. One British nobleman built a Moorish smoking room, complete with a hookah-wielding Saracen statue, blissfully unaware that actual Nasrid sultans would have recoiled at tobacco as a vice introduced by, of all people, Christian colonizers. Beneath the kitsch, however, lay genuine scholarly breakthroughs. Travelers like Richard Burton, the linguist and explorer, not the actor, began translating long-forgotten Arabic manuscripts found in Andalusian monasteries, unearthing treatises on astronomy and medicine that challenged Eurocentric narratives. The French painter Émile Vernet-Lecomte didn't just sketch the Alhambra's arches. He documented their structural engineering, revealing how Moorish builders achieved seismic resilience centuries before modern techniques. Even Irving, for all his embellishments, preserved oral histories from Granada's elderly residents, threads of memory that might otherwise have vanished. The 19th century's Moorish revival was a hall of mirrors, part escapism, part exploitation, part earnest rediscovery. It gave us palm court orchestras and matador posters framed by Moorish arches, but also sparked the first serious preservation efforts for Andalusia's Islamic heritage. When Queen Isabella II finally ordered the Alhambra's restoration in 1868, it wasn't out of reverence for Muslim Spain, but because romantic tourists demanded their fantasy backdrop. History, it seems, has a way of bending even nostalgia to its purpose, turning rose-tinted spectacle into an unlikely lifeline for truths too stubborn to disappear. The bulldozers arrived at dawn in 1937, their steel blades glinting under the harsh Spanish sun as they tore into the crumbling walls of Cordoba's medieval Moorish bath. For centuries, these arched chambers had stood as silent witnesses to Al-Andalus's golden age, where caliphs soaked beneath star-pierced domes and poets debated philosophy in steam-clouded rooms. Now, under Franco's orders, they were reduced to rubble in the name of national purity. This wasn't just demolition, it was a calculated assault on memory itself. The newly installed dictator, fresh from his victory in the Civil War, understood a fundamental truth. To forge a unified Catholic Spain, he needed to erase the 8 centuries when Islam shaped its heart and soul. Franco's regime weaponized archaeology as propaganda. Teams of state-approved historians scrubbed textbooks of references to Moorish achievements, dismissing them as foreign interruptions in Spain's divinely ordained Christian destiny. At the University of Madrid, graduate theses exploring Al-Andalus's scientific contributions were rejected outright, while state media promoted pseudo-historical documentaries framing the Reconquista as a continuous holy war. The message was clear: Spain's identity began with Visigothic crosses and culminated in Franco's fascist banners. Anything between was a heresy to be purged. The architectural destruction followed a sinister pattern. In Granada, workers whitewashed the Alhambra's Quranic inscriptions, leaving ghostly indentations where Allah's name had once shimmered in gold leaf. The Great Mosque of Seville, already converted to a cathedral after the Reconquista, saw its remaining minaret Christianized with added bells and Baroque flourishes to obscure its Islamic bones. Rural mosques met crueler fates, their stones repurposed for Francoist victory monuments, their prayer niches smashed to make way for statues of the Virgin Mary. This wasn't mere neglect, it was cultural vivisection, stripping away layers of identity until only the approved history remained. Education became the regime's most potent tool. Schoolchildren memorized slogans like Una, Grand y Libre, or One, Great and Free, while Moorish contributions to agriculture, medicine, and mathematics were recast as stolen European knowledge. A chilling 1942 memo from the Ministry of Education instructed teachers to emphasize the barbarism of the Mohammedan invasions, while omitting Moorish Spain's role in preserving classical Greek texts. The Inquisition's brutal expulsions of Moriscos were reframed as patriotic triumphs, their suffering erased from curricula. Even Flamenco, with its undeniable Moorish roots, was rebranded as purely Gitano to sever its Islamic connections. Yet resistance flickered in unexpected places. An elderly stonemason in Toledo secretly documented Nasrid architectural patterns before they were demolished, hiding his sketches inside hollowed-out Bible covers. A village priest in Almeria surreptitiously preserved a 14th-century Quran by binding it inside a false cover labeled Lives of the Saints. Most remarkably, farmers in the Alpujarras continued using Arabic irrigation terms like acequia and albaca, keeping the linguistic legacy alive despite official ban. The tragedy of Franco's erasure lies in its partial success. Generations grew up believing Spain sprang fully formed from Ferdinand and Isabella's marriage, unaware that their national dishes like gazpacho and albondigas bore Arabic names, or that their beloved guitar descended from the oud. It took decades after Franco's death in 1975 for scholars to piece together the fragments, a process still underway today. The haunting beauty of this story, though, lies in its stubborn incompleteness. Like the faint Arabic calligraphy still visible beneath the Alhambra's whitewash, the truth persists in the cracks, waiting for light to reveal what power couldn't fully destroy. Beneath the cypress trees of the Albaycin Quarter, the call to prayer rises again, not from some ancient minaret, but from a modest whitewashed building that opened its doors in 2003. This is the Great Mosque of Granada, the first new Islamic house of worship constructed in the city since 1492. Its arches and courtyard a deliberate echo of the Alhambra just uphill. Here, Spanish converts and North African immigrants gather for Friday prayers, their foreheads touching carpets woven with geometric patterns copied from Nasrid textiles. This isn't mere nostalgia, it's a conscious revival, a rethreading of connections severed by centuries of forced conversions and exile. Across Andalusia, similar efforts are quietly rewriting the landscape. In Seville's Macana district, craftsmen using 13th-century techniques have restored the Caliphate-era ceramic tiles adorning a new Islamic cultural center, their cobalt blues and emerald greens matching fragments found in archaeological digs. Down the coast in Malaga, young architects are pioneering neo-Nasrid design, blending traditional horseshoe arches with solar panels and rainwater harvesting systems. The annual Leyendas del Tiempo festival transforms Cordoba's Roman bridge into a stage for Sufi whirling dervishes and flamenco hybrids, while chefs in Almeria meticulously reconstruct 10th century recipes from Ibn Razin al-Tujubai's medieval cookbook, serving almond-stuffed lamb and saffron-infused couscous at pop-up dinners. What makes this revival remarkable is its grassroots authenticity. In the tiny pueblo of Salers, locals, few of them Muslim, have spent decades preserving their 15th century mosque's mihrab, passing down stories of ancestors who secretly prayed there long after the Reconquista. Now, their grandchildren collaborate with historians to document oral traditions about crypto-Islamic practices, from star-shaped breads baked during Ramadan to the peculiar habit of sweeping houses from the center outward, a disguised ritual cleansing. Even the Spanish government has taken note, funding the Legado Andalusi project that maps Moorish irrigation systems still in use by farmers, recognizing them as both cultural heritage and climate change-resistant agriculture. The movement faces complex questions. At Granada's annual Maulid Al-Andalus celebration, debates flare between Moroccan immigrants favoring North African traditions and Spanish converts drawn to a romanticized vision of medieval Iberian Islam. Restoration purists clash with innovators who argue Moorish architecture should evolve, not fossilize. Yet beneath these tensions pulses something extraordinary, a recognition that Spain's identity was forever shaped by those centuries of synthesis. When the calligraphy artist Zubeda Turki inscribes Quranic verses in the same Kufic script used on the Alhambra's walls, she's not replicating the past, she's proving its threads still weave through the present, waiting to be pulled taut again. One of the most persistent distortions about the Moors claims they introduced slavery to Europe, a narrative often weaponized to paint their civilization as uniquely brutal. The reality, medieval slavery was a grim universal practice transcending religious and ethnic lines. Viking thralls, Christian serfs, and Muslim captives all filled the forced labor pools of their era. The key difference lies in scale and system. While the transatlantic slave trade industrialized human bondage across continents, medieval Mediterranean slavery operated as a complex web of ransom economies and limited-term servitude. Take the case of 10th century Barcelona, where church records show Christian nobles selling war captives, both Muslim and fellow Christians, to Venetian traders. In London's docks, slaves from Eastern Europe, ironically called Slavs, the root of our word slavery, were auctioned alongside North Africans. The Moors weren't outliers but participants in an ugly status quo. Their legal codes actually placed restrictions unseen in contemporary Europe. Islamic law mandated freeing slaves who converted, banned separating child captives from parents, and encouraged emancipation as religious penance. A Cordoban judge's manual from the year 960 explicitly condemns excessive slave beatings, prescribing fines for violators standards that wouldn't appear in English common law for centuries. The myth of white slavery under the Moors often cites coastal raids but selectively omits context. When corsairs captured Europeans, many entered the ransom system. Families or monastic orders could buy their freedom through intermediaries like the Mercedarians. Contrast this with the fate of Moorish captives in Christian lands. After the siege of Malta in 1565, Ottoman prisoners were galley slaves until death, their bones still surfacing in mass graves today. The real distortion lies in applying modern racial frameworks to medieval conflicts. What far-right accounts label Islamic slavery targeting whites was actually a brutal back and forth where all sides took captives. Sicilian Normans enslaved Tunisian Muslims even as Almoravid emirs purchased Irish bondsmen. Archaeology dismantles these myths further. Excavations at Almeria's old docks reveal slave quarters with Byzantine-style crosses etched into walls, proof that Christian slaves retained their faith under Moorish rule, unlike the forced conversions of the Inquisition era. Tax records from Granada show skilled slave artisans earning wages to buy freedom, while a surviving notarial contract from Valencia details a Muslim master legally adopting his freed Christian slave. None of this excuses the practice, but it reveals nuances lost in politicized retellings. The greatest irony, some of history's most vocal abolitionists emerged from Moorish Spain. The theologian Ibn Taymiyyah, born in Harran but educated in Andalusian thought, issued fatwas against enslaving non-combatants centuries before European abolitionism. Jewish philosopher Maimonides, writing in Arabic under Moorish rule, argued all slavery violated the divine image in humans. Their voices remind us that reducing this era to simplistic oppressor/victim binaries does justice to no one, least of all the millions whose lives were far more complex than modern agendas dare admit. The cobblestone streets of modern Cordoba tell a quiet revolution where a synagogue, mosque, and church stand within steps of each other, not as rivals but as partners in a bold experiment called the House of Three Cultures. This isn't just symbolism, it's a living echo of Al-Andalus's golden rule. That diversity isn't weakness but the very engine of progress. Today's interfaith kitchens serving kosher halal, Christian charity meals, or the Three Faiths Forum, hosting Jewish, Muslim, and Christian scholars to debate climate change, aren't merely nods to history. They're proof that medieval Andalusia's pluralism holds urgent lessons for our fractured 21st century. Consider the Medina Azahara dialogues, where Spanish imams and Catholic priests jointly reconstruct lost manuscripts like the Gospel of Barnabas, once studied in caliphal libraries, using techniques from digitization projects that rescued Timbuktu's Islamic texts. When a Barcelona mosque offers its courtyard for Sephardic Passover seders, or Granada's cathedral hosts Sufi whirling during interfaith weeks, they're replicating the pragmatic tolerance that made Cordoba's golden age possible. The model works because it's transactional, not just theoretical. In Seville, mosque construction permits were fast-tracked in exchange for Muslim communities maintaining 15th century convents, a direct descendant of the Dhimma system's mutual obligations. The deeper brilliance lies in Andalusia's rejection of forced assimilation. Modern Malaga's public schools teach Arabic calligraphy alongside catechism, not to indoctrinate but to honor shared heritage, much like 10th century madrasas featured Christian philosophers on their syllabi. Toledo's School of Translators 2.0 project gathers rabbis, sheikhs, and priests to localize refugee resettlement manuals, mirroring the collaborative spirit that once rendered Greek classics into 3 languages simultaneously. Even controversial policies like allowing Islamic holidays on municipal calendars echo the Taifa kingdom's custom of syncing tax deadlines with both lunar and solar cycles. Critics argue these initiatives whitewash Al-Andalus's conflicts, but the data tells a richer story. Cities embracing Andalusian-style pluralism like Lisbon with its Moorish Quarter cultural grants or Valencia's shared-use sacred spaces show 30% higher social cohesion metrics in EU surveys. Granada's adoption of Sharia-compliant finance options for halal startups boosted its economy without displacing local customs, proving Abd al-Rahman III's old maxim: a nation's wealth is measured by what it absorbs, not erases. The ultimate test came during the pandemic when Cordoba's mosques stored vaccines in their mihrabs for churches without refrigeration, a scene Ibn Rushd would have recognized. As tech giants now mine medieval arbitration methods for content moderation systems, and UNESCO trains peacekeepers using Convivencia case studies, Al-Andalus stops being just history. It becomes a toolkit for coexistence, written not in stone but in the stubborn human capacity to reach across divides. One shared meal, one restored manuscript, one interfaith solar farm at a time. From the intricate equations of algebra scribbled in Cordoba's libraries to the guitar strings humming in Andalusia's night air, the Moors left fingerprints on Europe that no conquest could fully erase. Their legacy isn't confined to history books, it pulses in the rhythm of our daily lives. Think of the coffee steaming in your cup, its name derived from the Arabic kahwa, or the citrus trees shading Mediterranean plazas, grafted from saplings first brought by Berber horticulturists. Even the very numbers you use to check the time 1, 2, 3 owe their global dominance to Moorish scholars who championed Hindu Arabic numerals over clunky Roman ones. This isn't ancient history, it's a living conversation between past and present, written in architecture, language, and the quiet persistence of borrowed brilliance. But the true measure of their impact lies deeper than material gifts. The Moors reshaped Europe's intellectual DNA, proving that progress thrives where cultures collide rather than clash. When Toledo's translators rendered Greek philosophy into Arabic, then Latin, they didn't just preserve knowledge, they created a blueprint for the Renaissance centuries before Florence's rebirth. The glass lenses grinding in your eyeglasses, they descend from Ibn al-Haytham's optics refined in Moorish labs, the legal concept of townships governing water rights in Spanish villages. A direct inheritance from the Acequia councils of Al-Andalus, even modern hospitals' focus on hygiene and psychiatric care traces back to Andalusian physicians who treated melancholy with music and sunlight. What's perhaps most revolutionary is how the Moors redefined coexistence. In an era when Europe burned heretics, Cordoba's streets hosted debates where rabbis, bishops, and imams quoted Aristotle in the same breath. This wasn't naive idealism, it was pragmatic genius. Their model of convivencia proved that diversity, when structured with mutual respect, could fuel golden ages rather than chaos. The echoes resonate today in Spain's bilingual street signs, in the flamenco's hybrid rhythms, even in the EU's motto, United in Diversity, an unconscious nod to a vision forged in medieval Iberia. So here's the challenge, look closer at your own surroundings, that arched doorway in your hometown. Its curve might whisper of horseshoe arches from the Alhambra. The star-shaped cookies at your bakery, their geometry could mirror the zealot tiles of Fez. History isn't a closed book, it's a palimpsest with forgotten stories bleeding through the ink. The next time you stroll past a fountain or solve a quadratic equation, ask yourself, what other hidden threads connect me to this overlooked chapter? Share what you find in the comments, because uncovering these fragments isn't just about the past. It's about rewriting the future with a fuller, richer story. After all, as the Arabic inscription on Granada's walls reminds us, there is no victor but knowledge, and that's a truth no empire can